Provocative title. Is Trump the lesser of the two evils? Often we have a situation where the opposite is asked, Biden being the lesser of the two evils, but I'm going to ask this from the context of Trump being the lesser of the two evils. Some people would automatically take the perspective that it's Biden that's the lesser. Some people will be shocked and aghast that the question is even asked at all. But perspectives are not absolutes, and oftentimes those perspectives are changed ideologically, or for that matter, what a person has to gain versus lose. And honestly, perspectives, especially from the standpoint of voting and what you want to use your vote for, is dependent upon the person or that tribe. In this very specific instance, though, dealing with Trump, that's the part. He's like a buzzword. We've had people who lose their mind over Donald Trump when their name is even mentioned, go into a frenzy and like veins bulging out of their throats and foam coming out of their mouth. But I do want to broach this because I do think there's something to be said for this argument, especially from the standpoint of the left. And again, perspectives are not absolute. When Sanders lost in the 2020 primary, hope went with him. Hope died the night that Sanders lost that race, and I would even probably say a few weeks before that, because it came across that he was flaming out. Here's the catch. There's a difference between an individual losing in a political contest versus the larger metrics of a contest. Meaning, it's true that Sanders did fail in the contest, but Sanders' strength was never in the political dimension specifically. The political dimension is only one dimension. And it's not an issue of you needing to actually win specifically with a candidate. What you need is leverage. Leverage is what pushes and compels a political space. And Sanders in this didn't have any specifically within the context of the party because they did not like him. They didn't like what he stood for. And him standing there, just standing there beside any random Democrat makes that Democrat corrode and fall apart. He's a true believer. Ideologically, he's a true believer. Do you think people should have health care? Yes. He gets it. He gets it. He understands it. I want Medicare for all because I want everybody to be covered in this country. Period. Now, that is not entirely a socialistic point of view because that's not doctors becoming postmen or doctors paid by the state or something like that. But it's still, for our political system, somewhat of an extreme spot. But not extreme in the sense that other people don't like it. You have 88% of Democrats that back it, and you have 70% of the public that backs it. More so extreme in the fact that it's a person who's pushing a policy where the goal of the policy is to do exactly what he says the policy does. Medicare for everybody. That's exactly what I say it is. It is trying to accomplish exactly what I'm trying to say it accomplishes. And considering that we're in the midst of an epidemic, it seems right on time. Same thing, college debt, elimination of student debt in public universities, free of cost. He's exactly what he says he is. The public itself that agrees with many of these policies, the public says, yes, we agree. Down the line, every time a policy conversation came up with either the environment and the Green New Deal, or Social Security, or for that matter, healthcare, Sanders won the policy argument. The argument that Sanders lost was electability. Now, the irony of this is that Trump is absolutely collapsing at this point, and we're in the midst of a pandemic. And those policies that Sanders were pushing seem to be dead on and right on time. And yet, there's no Sanders right now to push those policies. The power of the left and the power of Sanders was not in the political sphere. It was outside of it. The 30 million people that backed Medicare for all, or the 40 million, how many ever, that were in and outside of the Democratic Party, that called themselves Democrats, that didn't call themselves Democrats, those people, that's where that power lied. And harnessing that would have been the way, especially in 2020, when you knew that those policies were popular, would have been the way to try to get those things accomplished. The only path for the left when Sanders flamed out wasn't to lose hope or wasn't to necessarily get disgruntled. That was the time to actually push. I would argue that the salvation was there to be founded. The catch here is the left has gotten so accustomed to taking the back door that the moment that Sanders lost that race, the moment where they should have been getting louder and more obstinate, more you represent our interests and you get our vote. 88% of the public backs this policy. 70% of the general public backs this policy? How is it a representative government? How is it a party that respects and cares about the interests of its members when 88% back it and the Democratic nominee basically said, I'd veto it if it was able to pass muster? The left, despite knowing his policies were popular, despite winning the policy argument, followed Joe Biden to the DNC's representative glory hole, never washed, always fresh. And they got their old knee pads out, also never washed, always fresh. And they got to work. Joe Biden with the full expectation that he would be backed and supported. I'm making the point that the pathway for the left wasn't back into the glory hole barn of the DNC. The pathway for the left was to take off those knee pads, to burn those knee pads, and to walk in the other direction under policy and say, you represent our interests and you get our vote. I mean, for God's sake, do you honestly believe that the Democratic Party can ever get a president elected without the lefty vote? Or for that matter, without the black vote? And the answer to that, of course, is no, they can't get elected without those votes. And yet, blacks and lefties have no power in the Democratic Party. Don't mistaken when they say you have power for this or for that. That's just optics, that's just talk. I'm talking about in real terms. You have, 7 million people infected with COVID-19. Those are going to be medical bills. There are all sorts of things that extend beyond the individual having that particular illness. And 200,000 dead? They're going to be, 300,000 dead by Christmas? Disproportionate number of African Americans affected on both infected and people that died. And yet, you can't get the party to back Medicare for all, something that would dramatically be in the best interest of the African Americans or Hispanics or lefties that are dealing with this particular issue. I'm making the point that you don't have any power in this process because you incentivize them to take advantage of you by voting for them without having anything attached to that vote. Meaning you vote without giving anything or expecting anything, despite the fact that the entire point of the vote is to represent the interests of constituents. I've made the argument that voting for Trump or voting for Biden is a diminishment of democracy. And I made that argument because people are voting for him not because he's given an affirmative case, but more so entirely just because of who he is not. Meaning you got people voting out of cowardice, not because you have any expectation that Biden is going to do this or Biden is going to do that, something that you should, by the way. It should be the politician that goes out and says, I'm going to do this to get your vote. We've gotten to the point in this country where it's the opposite. People throw themselves at Biden because they're terrified of Trump. And I'm saying that is a diminishment of democracy. It is, whatever you want to think of it, you may call it sick, you may call it depraved, you may call it whatever you want to call it. It is to some degree an elevation of democracy in the fact that the majority of the people who are voting for Trump are doing it because he's Trump. Is voting for Trump the lesser of the two evils that we're being given as a country? And whatever viewpoint you want to take, I would imagine Democrats will be aghast by that. But assume for the moment you're not a Democrat. Is Trump the lesser of the two evils? Welcome to the Soapbox. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. Look, I look at this in terms that if people who consider themselves on the left, people who consider themselves Democrats, if they wouldn't have just immediately acquiesced to the level of influence at the point where Sanders lost, if those people would have said, I'm done, I'm not going to continue to play this game, especially when the pandemic hit. There are 30 million people out of a job. There are 30, 40 million people that don't have health care. You have 6, 7 million people infected with this thing. 200,000 have died. I'm done. Not playing this game anymore. And you walked and said, again, represent my interests and you'll get my vote. And my interest in this case is the interest of America, where you have 70% of the public that says we want health care, or at the very least government should be mandating and covering health care, but everybody should be covered. That is a dominant number of people who said they want it in the midst of a healthcare crisis, and you still can't get the party to acquiesce and back it. I'm making the point that you have no power in this party. From the standpoint of blacks or lefties, you are utterly irrelevant. And the support that you give them is not support that is turned around where it says, okay, you gave us this, so we're going to. The support that you give them is accepted. They say thank you, and they go about and proceeding what they want. It's about leverage. It's not about giving it away. You have, yes, a large number of African Americans and lefties who vote in the Democratic Party, but those people are voting because they're terrified of Republicans, not for any kind of affirmative message in regards to this is what we want, this is what we're going to get, this is what the country needs. For God's sake, the country is literally in a healthcare emergency. And you still can't get Democrats to back a policy that the overwhelming majority of its members supports. How is it a democracy? How is it a representative government if the people who are in your party can't even get what they want when they're pushing for it to the tune of 88%? And you can go down the list with these policies: expansion of Social Security, elimination of student debt, the legalization of marijuana. Then these are policies roundly that Democrats don't back. I'm making the point that lefties for the last 40 and 50 years have basically backed a party that didn't back those things that lefties believed in. And so you had the rich and you had the poor and the workers on the other side of this. But basically, between dollars and pitchforks, the only thing you had was dollars. And you had lefties who got into their heads that the Democratic Party was right and that they had nowhere else to go and that they had to stay there and just accept whatever those Democrats did. This incrementalism with the fig leaf of identity politics in order to get people into this mindset that just because you put somebody there who's black, that person is going to attend to the interests of the overwhelming majority in the country of people that are black. And that, of course, is nonsense. Obama's blackness didn't stop him from giving 95% of the income gains to the top 1%, nor did it protect those homeowners, nor did it protect the water in Michigan that people were drinking it that were black. I make it a point, it's a false notion that putting somebody in the office just because of their race or just because of their gender or sexuality, that in and of itself gives any type of clue to their governance. And mostly, this tend to boil down the lines of issues of class. I want to show you an argument that Chomsky got in with Bernie Sanders' communications. I believe she used to be his communications director, speechwriter. I think it was communications director. I could be wrong. But Joy Brejoy, listen to the back and forth that these two have. Chomsky is wrong on this. And let's hear.
Now we have a simple question. Do you want your grandchildren to survive? I think the people you're talking to say, yes, I want my grandchildren to survive.
So many people's grandchildren are already not surviving.
Yes,
That's the issue.
You want to ensure that they'll live underwater or have a chance to survive.
So many people aren't thinking about living underwater because they're incarcerated or they're unhomed.
Then as an activist, your goal is to get them to think about it.
But that's just it. That's not her job. Her job is to get those policies accomplished. And to get those policies accomplished and to get Joe Biden elected, those are two vastly different things. You can influence a political space directly by getting your candidate elected, of course, but you can also influence with any leverage that you have at your disposal. In this very specific case, the leverage that the left had at its disposal was knowing and fully understanding that the majority of the country backed your policies. And to be able to stand outside of the political space and say, you get our vote when you represent our interests. And there are 30 million of us. And it is abominable that I even have to make the argument that you should represent us and back Medicare for all. But since I have to make this argument, I have to make this argument. Does the Democratic Party really believe and really want a man who they call the walking apocalypse to win this race, as opposed to them appropriating policy that would organically bring the party together so they could win it? Meaning, the issue of whether or not Joe Biden could win this race, if Joe Biden appropriated Medicare for all, Joe Biden is not losing anybody that was backing Joe Biden. And Joe Biden would get that support. He would organically bring the party together, and he would beat Trump. But that's not what they're doing, and that's kind of the point. They're basically holding the country hostage. I know you want these things, but you either elect us and not get those things, or take the gamble where you can end up with Trump again. Chomsky is wrong. Chomsky is wrong. And ultimately, the question becomes, what's your democracy? And do you have a democracy at all? And if you have one of the major parties that would make the argument that, yes, this man is a maniac. Yes, this man is a walking apocalypse. Yes, this man is the end of all things. And yet, we will not appropriate Medicare for All, the policy that 88% of the members of its own party support. We will not appropriate legalizing marijuana. Again, something that the majority of the public supports. We will not appropriate these things. And we will rather tank it than set the precedent of the public issuing a demand and the party having to respond to it. Whether Chomsky realizes it or not, if a person is concerned about their kid getting food, they're not going to care about their great-grandkids living underwater. This is a flat fact. Joe Biden is not a political solution to this. And in fact of the matter is, for the last, 40-something years, Joe Biden has been one of those people, brick by brick, constructing the system right now that everybody is blaming Trump for. Now, I find Trump abominable, to put it mildly. I find him appalling and utterly incompetent as a leader and bereft of compassion for anything that is not within his specific orbit. But again, this notion of whether or not Trump is a lesser evil, that's different. For example, if you're talking about foreign policy, if I am going through the directory of Democratic ills in regards to foreign policy, especially in the term that Joe Biden signed up for, you have Libya, basically the destruction of that country. You have the destruction of Syria, 500,000 people dying in that one. I mean, how do you quantify whether or not somebody is more appalling than the other when you get into these numbers of life that goes into the hundreds of thousands? I mean, when Joe Biden is trying to cut Social Security, do you think that hurts or helps people? When Joe Biden is going after the Russiagate stuff or the Chinagate stuff or the China stuff, when he gets in office, do you think he would be better or worse on those issues? Meaning, on foreign policy, believe it or not, Donald Trump has been more trending towards the left. Yes, he's been attacking Venezuela. Yes, he's been attacking Iran. But Donald Trump hasn't started any new wars. And I think that's the issue here. The 500,000 people that died in that war in Syria, is Joe Biden going to pull out of Syria? Probably not. Does he have any compunction to? Probably not. Would he probably have started that war in the way that Obama did? Yes, he probably would have. I hope you get my point. This gets into issues of foreign policy that I don't necessarily believe Joe Biden is all that strong on. Even, believe it or not, when you get into this idea of Yemen and the green lighting of the war, or Ukraine, Joe Biden being the viceroy of the Ukraine and the shenanigans that went on with the Russia stuff, and even the Trans-Pacific Partnership, meaning the signing over of our sovereignty to another country. Signing over sovereignty, basically trade deal, and have these trade deal negotiations or relationships where this stuff gets sorted out in a court that supersedes our own laws. Now, treaties supersedes our own laws anyway, but some of the stuff that was in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, their pathway, they're trying to hedge off China. It was grotesque. Doesn't necessarily mean that Donald Trump is doing a greater job, but theirs was also grotesque. The drone killings that took place under Obama, where at times 90% they didn't even know who they were killing. It's not so much that all of these things are better under Trump. It's more so that some of these things are better under Trump, and people don't take them into account when they're praising Trump. There's a selfishness that we take on about our domestic policy where we're like, as long as it's happening abroad and it's not happening here, well, we give it lesser priority. I'm saying, can you give it a lesser priority if one of your issues is foreign policy? And I've met many people who their issue is foreign policy and they prefer, even though they bemoan Donald Trump's actions, the murder of Soleimani or the belligerence towards Russia and the pulling out of the trade agreements or missile agreements. they at the very least accept that some of that belligerence was probably in trying to find a way to balance off this attack by Democrats that he's friendly to Russia. That's the first point around that. Meaning, even the attacks on Trump and even some of the bad and horrible, worst aspects of the things that he's done in pulling out those nuclear missile treaties, even that to some degree is motivated by political behavior of his political opponents pushing him in a particular direction. So from a foreign policy standpoint, I do think an argument can be made. But the catch is, we don't live in our foreign policy. We live in domestic policy. And when you get into domestic policy, that's where things get nastier, and that's when things get more mired and more fraught. But fact of the matter is, many of the stuff that they're, again, blaming Trump on was put in brick by Biden. Trump may be the law and order candidate right now, but Joe Biden was the law and order candidate just less than a decade ago. And it's culpable for the killings that we've seen by these cops and the crime system that allows these guys to get off. Trump, for whatever reason, decided to take a law and order approach, missing the point that Joe Biden's weakness was in law and order, and not for not standing up for the cops and those organizations, but for being over the top and putting through laws and putting through, let's say, a perspective into those laws that have affected people in the society itself. Even the using his son or those African Americans for props, like George Floyd and Jacob Blake. From the standpoint of a lefty, and from the standpoint of somebody looking at this race, and my question becomes, how do we, if you're working entirely from the standpoint of policy, how do you push for your policy objectives? Putting Trump in office or putting Biden in office doesn't get me there. If you don't have the capability to push Biden to the left when you have 88% of people backing a policy, then you have no power at all in general. And getting that person in office is probably going to mean you're going to have even less then. When Biden gets in office, basically anybody and the people on the left are going to be cornered. You're going to be marginalized that much more. Whether you realize it, the voting of Democrats and continuously voting for Democrats creates a disincentive in regards to doing anything for you. If you want to get their support, they need to believe they can lose. And for them to believe they can lose, therein lies your leverage, therein lies your break. It's not so much that voting for Trump is on the marquee, but it is something to be said for getting across to them that you would not vote for them and that they can lose that support and lose that election. And until people get there, nothing changes. Meaning, if you don't like homelessness and you know that Joe Biden is not going to really do anything about poverty in any real measure, and backing Biden basically allows homelessness to persist, at some point, that has to be reconciled. This notion of you have nowhere else to go. Because ultimately, Nancy Pelosi does have somewhere else to go. Those millionaires and billionaires backing the Democratic Party, they do have somewhere else to go. It doesn't hurt them for Trump to get in office. It does hurt you. And therein lies the crux in regards to why they're able to be so effective with that very specific argument. I'm saying it doesn't matter, though. At the end of the day, in order for us to get anything real accomplished in this country, you need to have some leverage on the political space, and that right there lies your leverage. With that many people supporting that policy or those policies, you'd have had an opportunity. From the standpoint of Trump, though, look, Trump is a sledgehammer, and our political system clearly hates his guts, and I find him to be monstrously incompetent. But whether or not Trump is the lesser evil in this race, I vacillate back and forth on that. Because if you look at now, you have an opportunity, for the most part, in 2020 to fundamentally change your political space. And you had lefties that finally began to see themselves for who they were and see the Democratic Party for what it was. And that opportunity, I think, goes away the moment that a Democrat gets in office. The other side of that, though, is you have all of this negative consequence in regards to Trump being an ogre. And yes, he's going to solidify the Supreme Court. Yes, he's going to get the House and he's most likely going to get the Senate, meaning you will have a House, Senate, presidency, and Supreme Court to the tune of maybe 4 or 5 judges put in by Trump. That's your government. That's called checkmate. So my argument is rarely ever or never really a rah-rah for Trump. It's more so trying to make it more acute that it doesn't really matter who's in office. It doesn't really matter who's running against that person. What matters is your ability to control your political space. And part and parcel to that is not do it through a sense of fear. It's through power. And I don't mean it in the, way people say it. I just mean it in the very strictest sense that you, as a group, as a collective, as a society, have certain things that you need and certain things that you require based on the environmental circumstances that are around you. It is your job, and it is their job to come and get your vote. It is your job to hold them accountable in doing so and to assert what you need in your political space. We have lost that. Instead of us doing that, we basically vote entirely out of cowardice or fear. Oh, I'm terrified of that guy. Just get him out of office. Just get him out of office. Missing the point that your country has real things that it needs to do. Oftentimes, people call it privilege when people don't vote. Missing the point that privilege is the vote. Privilege is the vote. For you to sit there and to be able to vote Joe Biden in without necessarily attesting to the problems that avail your society is privilege. I'm making the point that holding your political leader accountable, being willing to say, yes, I would let you fail if you don't back these policies that we need at this moment of such an opportune time. Yes, it is that coming together that is political strength, not just giving it up to Joe Biden for no reason. I hope you understand what I'm saying. I'm saying it is true that Trump is an ogre. It is true that Trump can be the end of days. But it is also true that it is the job of you to hold your candidate and the person you're voting in accountable, and to not let this nonsense of a scam to persist itself, where one party uses the failings and the failures of another candidate to allow their own horribleness. I'm going to be a nanometer better than that guy. And then I'm going to make the argument that I'm a nanometer better. And I'm going to say it's rational because I'm a nanometer better that you vote for me. Nonsense. This is what has persisted for the last 40, 50 years. And I'm saying at some point it has to stop. People outside of party articulating a demand. What they say, power concedes nothing without a demand. There's your demand. Medicare for all. We're in the midst of a pandemic. It will be a pay increase, highest in a generation, in addition to cutting down medical costs. That's our demand. And to the tune of 30, 40 million, stand there and say it. That's how you get things accomplished. Weakness, begging. What? Blacks vote to the tune of 90% Democrat and yet have no power in the party. And you have lefties who do pretty much the same and have no power in the party. And voting to the tune of those to that number. Not only does it not do anything from the standpoint of you getting influence, it incentivizes them to take advantage of you in the political space. It's rational for them to do so, actually. I'll end this here. Whether Trump is the lesser evil or not really does depend upon your political posturing. If you are on the left and you make the argument, this gives me space and time to try to make the argument that the Democratic Party no longer can win and ideologically hold back the night. I think that argument is fair. You pay a lot for that muffler, but that argument is fair. When it gets to this notion of, Trump is a lesser evil because he's going to engage in less wars and foreign militarism. Again, that's a fair point to be made. Trump did engage in less foreign wars and less militarism in comparison to Obama, who, oh my God, between Libya, Yemen, not to mention the wars in Africa, where we've been putting our troops in. I don't think it's that easy of a case. The reason I'm talking about this now is because we were talking about this back and forth on our team the other day. And I think it is a fair point. Most people would reflexively, especially Democrats, would reflexively say, well, no, it has to be Biden is the lesser of the evil. But again, if you're doing well, if your needs are met, yeah, you may say that. And beyond your needs being met, if you're not entirely paying attention to what is happening outside of the U.S., again, you may say that. You may even say that because you buy into the belief that we should stay in Syria and Afghanistan forever. I would think you're wrong on that. Hence, we may come to a different conclusion in regards to our militarism around the world. But you have a lot of people who think Trump is clearly worse. And because he's clearly worse, that what I just said is somehow wrong. Missing the point that it really does depend upon perspective, what you're trying to accomplish. And not everybody is trying to accomplish the same thing. Some people just wants to bring a sledgehammer to it all. All right. But I'll leave it here. Like, share, and of course, subscribe. Darian Levy. Biden and Obama essentially, Biden and Obama essentially ensure Americans will be stuck with Bidenism. I think that's Bidenism for a long time, and soft left will be shit in. Yes, shit in and out of luck. Well, that's what they backed. Like, honestly, think about it for a moment. Sanders loses. Sanders gets on the podium and he says, look, I told you I gave you my support, but I entirely understand why 20, 30, 40 million people out there who are in need of solutions to their problems like healthcare and who back this policy in the Democratic Party to the tune of 88%. I can understand why those people may be reluctant to back you without you backing the policies that they need in their lives, their healthcare. And another person, AOC, comes out and says something. Then another group says something. And those groups get a certain resonance, even without Sanders, by the way. Take him out of it. Those groups started getting a certain resonance of saying, you're not going to get our support if you don't back our interests. And loud about it. Very clear about their intentions and about the things that they're saying. And in saying that, you get a party that says, despite how bad Trump is, we could lose. Now, the question, honestly, that really should have been asked for the past, God knows, year at the very least, is if Donald Trump is really an ogre, if Donald Trump is really going to destroy America, destroy the world, he's the thing that you have to hold back in order to hold back the night. Fair enough. Let's say I accept your premise. So does that mean that you're going to accept policies that are popular, that bring people to your cause in order to ensure that you beat Donald Trump and that the energy is there in your campaign to beat Donald Trump? Of course, the answer is no. Of course, the answer is no. Now, whether Donald Trump is the knight or night, put that to the side. I'm making a larger point that if the public is indeed demanding for these particular policy demands, and they say, we want this, we want this, we want this, we want this, and the Democratic Party is not offering those things, then, it's like either you don't believe he's the knight in which you say he is, or for that matter, you can live in the dark. It's one or the other. And I suspect it's because they can live in the dark. Many of them, anyway. Donald Trump might be the darkness. Fair enough. But if that's true, are you really going to tank it to that guy? Like, understand what I'm saying. Are you going to tank it to a man who you're basically calling the apocalypse, as opposed to appropriate policy that has 88% support? That seems unconscionable. That seems insane. But that's the premise that we get. And that is the quirk of how you see that argument flips on his head. If it is indeed the responsibility of the candidate to get people's votes, that's his job, literally, to get elected. And those candidates or those people who votes he needs says, look, we have all of these people infected. We have all of these people without a job. We have all of these people that need this and need that. Fine. What is the candidate's job in this case? All right, I need to represent their interests. So what are the policies that you need me to represent in order to attend to these problems, the crisis that you have availing you? It turns the argument on its head to say that it's not the candidate's job to do that, but instead it's people's job to throw themselves at the candidate, Not because the candidate is there to alleviate these issues per se, but the candidate is there entirely just to get out the other guy. Go back to status quo, the same thing that the other guy was voted in to change and uproot. It's bizarre. That's our political system, though. Like, it's not a vote for these policies. It's a vote just to get rid of the guy. I'm saying how bizarre that is. Do you believe that the next Democratic or the next candidate is going to be any better? You're going to have Ted Cruz. You're going to have Tom Cotton. You're going to have more competent operators of basically Trump's policies. So I don't see how that's bettering the situation. Trump is not the disease. He's just a symptom of that. And going back to status quo was the thing that allowed the system to get to the point of putting Trump in there in the first place. So, Democrats want to make it as if everything that is wrong is a factor of Trump. And that's nonsense. And between Biden and Trump, Biden has been in there far longer to complicate and fuck up our system than Trump has. Pop reality. Chomsky forgot the root word of politics is policy. Well, I think Chomsky is trying to make an argument for Joe Biden. Chomsky is an anarchist. And as he's looking at Biden, he's trying to say, well, look, there's an existential problem. Who, if you're making an argument just purely on intellect, and you say this is existential, meaning life on Earth is going to erode and go away. But Chomsky doesn't realize that whether it's an existential argument in 30, 40, 50 years, that people's issues are now. They're now. And so going back to status quo, where even before COVID hit, you had 42% of the public living on $18,000. I mean, you had basically nearly half of your society living in poverty. And you're talking to me about something in the future. That argument doesn't fly. That argument doesn't work. You have to deal with people's real material concerns before they would ever look at something like climate change as being a valid argument against this or against, any living situation that they're involved in. So yeah, Chomsky is wrong in that. Chomsky is wrong. Let's see, Michael Williams. Why haven't you linked up with Jimmy Dore yet? Y'all are the same wavelength on this. Y'all, the man I hear the loudest on this, lefties unite. Well, look, Dore, I have no power to get in with Dore. That's a Dore thing. Dore has nearly 500,000 subscribers, if I'm not mistaken. And I don't even think I'm at 30,000 yet. And so it's like, that's not on me. That's on Dore. And I've been on the show once. But it was a back and forth that we were having about a video. I forget the name. I think it was something that Yang said, if I'm not mistaken. But we had a debate about it. He has that clip. I don't have that clip. So, again, none of this stuff is on me. This stuff is on him. But that's it. I'm going to leave it here. Like, share, and of course, subscribe.